Hi, Rich Leiter here. Welcome to my channel. Most of us who have gone to school, been educated, have come across the notion of the Platonic form. The notion that there are forms in the world, but according to Plato, there is an ideal form for everything. For instance, there are many chairs in the world, but then there's the Platonic notion of a chair. There's the actual form of a chair from which all of these chairs that exist in the world originate. In other words, there's a form behind all of these forms. One form, that's called the Platonic form, as I understand it anyway. Well, when it comes to books, I see books, all of the books in the world, all the novels, all of the philosophy that's been written, I see all of these different books written by different people as being forms. They're all just different forms, each one of them. And when I look at booktubers talking about books, people who do book reviews of maybe a book a week, some of these booktubers are voracious readers. They can do 50 or more book reviews a year, you know. Me, I'm a very slow reader, but some of them can just zip through a book and talk about it, sometimes very intelligently and insightfully. So all of these booktubers, I've noticed, to a fault, without exception, read one book after the other book. There are many reasons, of course, for reading a book. There isn't just one reason for reading a book. There are many. One reason, of course, is if you decide to become a booktuber. You want to read a book because you're a reader. You figure, hey, let me have a channel. Let me get subscribers. Maybe I'll get enough subscribers to become monetized. I'll make a little bit of income on the side. That's one reason for reading a book. If you're a teacher, an academician, a scholar, a professor at a college, well, why do you read books? You read books because that's how you pay your mortgage. It's your business to read books and then discuss them with your students. So in a way, it's also a source of income. In a way, nothing wrong with it, but it's a source of income for many people. That's why they read books. Some people read books because, they just enjoy reading. Just like some people enjoy going to the movies to entertain themselves, well, some people read books because that's how they entertain themselves. It's a much more elevated, a higher, more refined form of entertainment than the movies are. That's for darn sure. Okay, and there's nothing wrong with that either. If you're a writer or somebody who wants to be a writer, well, then you want to read some books, right? You want to read some books that you admire, and you want to study those books, not just for the ideas espoused in those books, but for the way in which those ideas are espoused, the style of the book. I've done that a lot. I don't think you can be a writer unless you've done that. You don't just write in a vacuum. So that's another reason why you read books. Some people read books because they're hoping to gain wisdom from the book. They think that reading a book is synonymous with gaining wisdom, and I used to think that also. I mean, if you read a lot of books, you'll certainly have, the more books you read, the more ideas you will get. The more you will be aware of all of the different people in the world who have ideas, some of them very clever ideas, some of them very brilliant ideas. So the more books you read, the more your mind will become cluttered with all sorts of ideas. That's true. But by reading all these books and having all these ideas, floating around in your head, scrambling around in your brain, that in and of itself will not make you a wise person. Being exposed to ideas may enlarge your view of the world, but it's not going to make you a wise person, somebody who has your own unique vision of the world, where you have a kind of understanding of the world, which is unshakable. You have your own unshakable understanding of the world. That to me is an impromptu definition for me of wisdom. Now, if you're hoping to get wisdom from a book, I don't think that you're going to. You will get ideas from books. You can go to a cocktail party and you'll be able to talk about ideas easily sometimes. Somebody mentions Plato, you'll be able to talk about Plato. Somebody mentions Schopenhauer, you'll be able to talk about Schopenhauer, but you're talking about ideas, okay? Very nice, but it's not synonymous with wisdom. I don't think that you can become wise from reading books. I think that the way that a person becomes wise is by experiencing life. And experiencing life is a euphemism for making all sorts of mistakes in life. You learn from your mistakes, hopefully, okay? The person who is wise is the person who has made lots and lots of mistakes in his or her life. That, to me, is how you become wise. And when you read a book that resonates with you, you didn't learn anything from that book. The book is only, you can relate to the book. It resonates with you because it is approximating what you yourself have learned in life, aside from the book. In other words, the book is just a yardstick of how far you've come in life. That's it. That's a very important point that I'm making here. Books don't give you wisdom. Books simply reflect the wisdom which you have already accrued in the process of living. If Moby Dick resonates with you, it's not because you have learned or acquired Herman Melville's vision of the universe or Captain Ahab's vision of the universe. You've acquired a vision of the universe which may approximate that of Melville or which may approximate that of Captain Ahab. And when you actually read the book, you say, yeah, right. It confirms what you have learned outside of that book. Okay? So there are many reasons for reading a book. I've given up over the years. It took me a long time to realize this last point that I'm making. I mean, for many years, like most people, I actually believe that that by reading a lot, becoming a great reader, you will become wise. And for a person like myself, who was kind of a miserable young man, under kind of very miserable circumstances, I wanted very much to become wise very quickly. I thought that becoming wise by reading books, it would take me out of my misery. And it didn't. I mean, I became a pretty good reader, but it didn't take me out of my misery. It's not going to do that. Reading books is not a shortcut to life, to living. Okay? And a lot of people think that too. They think they're going to get a shortcut to becoming wise. They don't have to live and make mistakes for 20 or 30 years in order to become wise. They just have to read a book. And that's not right. It certainly wasn't right in my life. So these are all reasons for reading books. And one of the chief reasons, once I gave up on the idea that I was going to become wise by reading books, as this dream disappeared, as that illusion was blasted from me, slowly, didn't happen all at once. There is one other reason that I read books, and it was because I myself hoped to write, to become a writer. I always had some verbal facility. I always wanted to write. I always had the creative impulse. And so I studied books just to learn my craft. That is something which endures. To this day, I still do that. I still will read books, certain books, selected books, in a discriminating way, in order to expand the knowledge of the craft of writing. That's the one that's endured with me. But getting back to this notion of the Platonic form, there are many forms, and then there is the form of all forms. Well, on a very practical basis, when I watch booktubers just reading and reviewing one book after another, week after week after week, I see people who are chasing after forms. They are on the eternal chase for forms. It's like a carrot in front of a donkey's nose. The carrot makes the donkey keep going on and on and on and on. Of course, the donkey has no knowledge as to where he's going. He's just going, hoping that he's going to get to that carrot, which of course is an impossibility. So these booktubers and these reading fanatics read one book, chase one form after the other form. In a way, the book is like a source of nourishment to them. And after they finish one book, they get hungry again, and they need another source of nourishment. They need another book and another book. Another metaphor is it's kind of like that old saying about if you give a man a fish, you'll feed him for a day. If you teach a man how to fish, you feed him for a lifetime. Well, these people who just read one book after another, who hunger for nourishment repeatedly, are like the person who doesn't know how to fish, but who has to rely on a book for nourishment, for his sustenance. This is true also of scholars, of academicians. Academicians are not creative artists. Academicians rely on creative artists in order to feed them. They are dependent upon that. I'm not denigrating scholars. I'm just saying that it's not at the same order for me as being a creative artist, a creative writer or painter or composer. It's not on the same level. So they need books. The Shakespearean scholar needs Shakespeare to get his nourishment. But of course, the Shakespearean scholar is not Shakespeare. He cannot write like Shakespeare. Not to my knowledge, anyway. Harold Bloom was pretty nice, pretty big scholar, right? But Harold Bloom couldn't write. He couldn't actually be a creative writer. I think he wrote one book, which he himself disowned. He admitted he's just not a writer. He's a scholar. They're very different things. So you can do that. You can chase forms forever, one form after the other form. You read books, one book after the other book. You can do that, which I've done for a while. But at a certain point, for certain people, the need, emphasis on the word need, the need to do that, to keep chasing after forms, diminishes over time. It has with me. It doesn't mean that I still don't read and that I don't want to read more books, but I don't want to read them at the same frenetic, breakneck speed that I see booktubers and other book junkies reading. There's no longer that urgency from me. And I think the reason that there is ultimately, I think the reason that there is no longer that urgency from me is I'm kind of an older fellow now. I've been around the block, and I have wearied, not everyone does, but I have wearied of chasing after forms. To me, I seek the form of forms more than I do isolated, disparate forms. Now, this is not a fancy rationalization for excusing my laziness for not wanting to read anymore. It's not that, because as I say, I still do read, and I like to read, books that interest me, and perhaps I will do a review of a book that interests me. But the urgency is not there anymore, because I recognize now that books are merely forms. And I am after the form of forms. I am after the unifying principle behind all books, behind all literature, if one exists. There's a man I met not too long ago, an artist, Paul Rhodes. He wrote a book called The Art in the Age of Anxiety, and he has his own theory about what art is, visual art. And to him, it's a balance between the illustrative, as he puts it, and the decorative. The illustrative being just the purely representational aspect, and the decorative, which is the more poetical, painterly aspect. In other words, he says, there's a balance. You don't want to become too illustrative, because then you're just kind of painting as if you're taking a photograph. If you're going to paint in a photographic manner, you might as well just take a picture of something. You don't want to do that. On the other hand, you don't want to become too decorative either, where you lose any sense of representation at all, where it becomes completely abstract. There's got to be a balance. You want to paint a picture of something that looks like what you're painting, but you want to put the decorative aspect into it so that it has a certain poetic quality to it, which transcends mere photography. At least that's the way I understand it. I hope I'm not butchering your idea, Mr. Rhodes. If so, I apologize. But anyway, the point is not whether you agree with this theory of Paul Rhodes or whether you disagree with it. The point is he has a theory. In other words, he has a theory of the form behind all forms, the form unifying all paintings. That's his Platonic form, I suppose. Other people have their own Platonic forms. I mean, when people talk about the meaning of life, they're looking for the meaning of life. Well, that means to me that they're looking for that unifying principle behind all other principles. That to me it's kind of a euphemism for saying I seek the form of forms. And I seek the form of forms. Now, I've mentioned frequently in previous podcasts, there is a Polish writer by the name of Witold Gombrowicz, who I admire. He wrote a book called Cosmos, which I've read and did a book review of. And in his journals, Witold Gombrowicz says, man is born out of chaos. But from the moment that man is born, he seeks to turn that chaos into form. There is a need in man to have form, to create meaning, even if there is none. Gombrowicz says there is none, and we just have this meaning, and he pokes fun of it in his novel Cosmos. Now, I don't know whether the universe means anything or whether it doesn't mean anything, whether it is just chaotic and this search for form, for meaning, for the Platonic form, whether this is just a silly illusion. But actions speak louder than words. And in my own life, even though I certainly admire very much Gombrowicz and his supposition that we are born out of chaos, and chaos is all that there is. I guess the way that I live my life, there's a part of me that has to believe that there is some kind of meaning. I mean, there's another very famous quote. You may be a little bit more familiar with that one than the Gombrowicz quote. Life is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. That's William Shakespeare in Macbeth. That's Macbeth speaking. And he's saying the same thing that Gombrowicz is. It doesn't mean anything. It's told by an idiot. There is no meaning to it, no grand design. I don't know. I don't know whether there is or there isn't, but the way I live my life still, even now at my advanced age, I guess I do believe that there is some kind of meaning behind all the other meanings. There is some kind of a Platonic form behind all of these other disparate forms in the material world of ours. And so I have wearied, to a large extent, of chasing after forms, disparate books, disparate ideas. There will always be more ideas in the world. There are so many people who have written so many things and have generated so many ideas, some of them brilliant, some of them very clever, some of them very stupid. There are more ideas probably than there are people in the world. I'll never get to all of them. And that's okay. But the point is, I have wearied of just reading a book after a book after a book for the sake of reading a book. I look for a unifying principle a lot more, which is why I am a lot more discriminating when I read, and why I don't read as much as I used to, and why I probably not going to do a lot of book reviews just to keep up with the Joneses, with all these other book reviewers. I will read in the discriminating way when the spirit suits me, and then whenever I read, I seek the form of forms, much more so now than before.